the Grey Hat Beard podcast. Hello and welcome to part 2 of Grey Hat Beard, the Modern Workplace Conference. If you haven't listened to part 1, do go back and give it a listen, where we talked about all the news and managed to talk about the Consumer Electronics Show without talking about any devices that much. In part 2, we're going to be talking about when and why you should use a third-party product with Microsoft 365. I'm sure some of you listening have gone out, purchased Microsoft 365 for your organization, you've got all your licenses, and then someone's trying to come along and persuade you that actually you need something else, that you need to spend more money on top of that. And you're sitting there thinking, no, I don't believe you. I'm just going to migrate things by hand. That's all I need to do. No, the governance of it is all easy. I can do that out of the box just by chatting to people and things like that. And you've probably seen there's so many products available out there that are all vying for your attention. And you're just not quite sure why you should do it. Why shouldn't you just try and do things yourself, try and make the most of the licenses? Now, we have with us as our guest, Michael Pisarek from Orchestry, a third-party product that is one of those people trying to get some of your attention. And I'm going to play the cynical person who's probably holding onto the purse strings and going, why on earth have I got to spend more money on something else when I've just given Microsoft a shed load of cash?
Well, I mean, I think there's multiple different ways to answer that question, but I think, in terms of what Orchestry does, but I think in general for third-party products, there's a lot of stuff that M365 does extremely well. But being such a broad platform, there's also a lot of gaps which you might want to fill in. And, what we encourage our customers and even potential customers to do is, there's definitely a lot of open source solutions out there, especially with the SharePoint community and the M365 community being as strong as it is. I think there's a ton of really good stuff that you might want to look at, which is essentially free. So some of the Microsoft app template stuff, like I've been looking at that, that stuff's amazing. Like that's unbelievable that that's all free and you can just go in and go and install it. But I think there's also a lot of capabilities that you might need above and beyond. M365 is not going to do everything. I think it's the sort of platform that does so much, and it does a lot of it really, really well. But there's obviously some gaps there, and that's really where us as third-party vendors are really trying to either fill in those gaps or accelerate some of the capabilities that maybe Microsoft hasn't developed for the platform yet also. And I think it's always been the case. I mean, M365 is a platform like Salesforce and like the iPhone. It's the same thing if you were going to ask, hey, I've just purchased this iPhone. Why do I need to go and download additional apps? Surely there's everything that I need. Yeah, or buy yet another converter for it. Yeah. I think it's the same thing, right? There's so many things that people are trying to do with Microsoft 365 that there's always going to be a gap there. But just be careful, right, with what you're buying and why you're buying it for. I think there's a lot of vendors out there which are trying to make money, and unfortunately, I think some of the stuff that is being built there, really, especially in M365, I don't know what you guys hear. It really is just a nicer way to maybe show some of the out-of-the-box capabilities that this tool does already, but maybe surfacing it a little bit easier. And I'm really passionate that I think third-party vendors need to be a little bit more innovative than that. So yeah, that's what I would say. What do you guys think?
I think that's true. You touched on the community, and there's so many community tools and things out there, and that's fantastic. If you want to have a team of people who will be dedicated to keeping these things running and being able to continually see the updates and get the latest things from that, and if you have a team of developers and IT pros who can manage that, listen to what the users want to make all those things happen, you can do it yourself. Absolutely. But I think, and I always hate blowing smoke up people's arse too much, but the reason I'm looking at Orchestry is because we started to look at building this for some clients to build that governance processes and things. And there are times you look at it, the amount of effort, and then look at the cost of bringing in something else that can do it. And you've got to consider what the different factors are, plus that ability, not just to build it up front, but to keep it going all that time as well. And making sure you consider those bits, I think, are absolutely true. And I think you're also right that it's also easy to buy some big names, and I'm not going to name any of them, but there are some big names out there that have some great marketing budgets, and many of them have great tools. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they have awful tools, but people tend to gravitate towards them because of those names and what they've heard, and because it's easier to do. So making sure you understand what you want from it, making sure you're buying the elements that you need, not just buying a massive tool that you're never actually going to use effectively in there, is one of those things you do need to consider.
And there's so many tools out there which do a broad level set of capabilities. Like Orchestry is obviously a provisioning solution, right? That's provisioning and governance and adoption. That's pretty broad. Don't have your developers in-house working on those types of solutions where you might be able to buy at a reasonable cost, where you can have them working on very specific high value things which are specific to your business or to your organization, right? That's what I would say. Use your dev team and your engineering team to create specific pieces within your organization that are not going to be bought third party, because it can be very specific to a business process or something that's super innovative. And that's, I think, another huge reason, right? And plus, some of the stuff, building provisioning solutions, I can tell you right now, is not fun at all. It's not an enjoyable thing.
Please do tell.
Yeah. It's not the most enjoyable thing to build. It's obviously highly useful, but have your developers do specific things for your organization which you're not going to be able to buy off the shelf.
I think the key thing is actually working out where the gaps are, working out what you actually need. So a lot of the time you'll look at things and you go, actually, maybe I'm in a highly regulated industry. I need more compliance. I need to be able to lock things down. And actually, looking at the platform, yes, it'll do all of those things, but there's an awful lot more to manage. There's an awful lot more to understand. And a lot of organizations, as a consultancy, we naturally go into organizations who don't have all the skills and the capacity to actually manage and understand a platform up front. So therefore, they're coming to us to say, can you fill this gap? That might be a short-term gap. It may be a long-term gap. And it's really for an organization to work out where that gap is and what they need it to be filled. If they can buy a product which is going to cost them 10% over the cost of its lifetime, as actually investing, testing, rolling out changes, that cost of ownership of something, then it's going to be much more cost effective. And I think that's where a lot of organizations don't necessarily take into account the long-term cost of ownership of a solution. That's really
working out, because if you're buying a product, you see that cost, you see that line item there straight away. If you've got a load of people there doing things already, you don't always consider what the cost of them is, of working out the requirements, of going out to speak to users. You don't always factor in that additional cost of things. So it's working out. And I feel like when I introduced this, so that I was kind of going in fairly heavy on third party people. That's actually not my view. My view is more often to buy things than build them yourselves. Look for what is available out there, because they've been through that pain. You can go and look at a community solution that covers that simple example. Third parties will often have been through all the painful bits that don't work with that as well.
Yeah. So I was just going to say on the back of that, I think that's one of the things that, you've talked about, the provisioning and how painful it can be. That's a perfect example, right? You're dealing with potentially multiple APIs in SharePoint, in Graph. They sometimes they don't work consistently. You have to handle those inconsistencies. Some things that are very simple on the face of it actually can cause a lot of pain, but it all has to be handled. Like going back to provisioning is it's a fairly generic process, right? It's like, I want something with some defaults set, right? And it sounds easy, but it can be quite painful. And I think, by using a third party that's gone through that pain, you're getting there much faster, right? Than what you would do internally, and having to go through those issues yourself and then find them and fix them as well.
Yeah, you could design and build your own CRM system. Very few people would. They would go to somebody who's actually been through the pain and invested the time. And it's the same thing. You've got a need, but somebody else has already done it. And as you say, provisioning, it's easy, isn't it? It's one line of PowerShell. Create site. That's surely
team.copy is the one. No, I think you bring up an interesting point in terms of long-term cost of ownership, and I think a lot of organizations don't understand that, because we're building on top of a platform. So it's not like we have direct access to a lot of the things. And that's, I think, what makes Microsoft 365 for me really fascinating, but also extremely challenging, right? And extremely challenging, because once again, you're trying to do this dance, particularly as a third-party product, of, are we building something that hopefully Microsoft's not going to build within a year or two? And I think everyone's been through the internet in a box space where that huge kind of shift happened, and then now all of a sudden all the stuff's there, and there's a completely different mood. So trying to understand where Microsoft is going, but also trying to keep this thing up. That's the bigger thing, where Microsoft is changing, APIs are changing. I mean, I can tell you right now, we would probably do, I think, Gary, you mentioned this, I think it's close to 5 to 600 calls, graph calls per provisioning job. Probably run, I think over a day, maybe between 500 to 700.
And how much of that is it's just, I've sent a request, I'm now waiting for any response, whether that is just, yes, I'm still working on it, or, oh, no, I've fallen over and you need to do something else. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, coming from the on-premises world of, being on SharePoint and, oh, we'll just change this configuration because it's fine. You don't have that option anymore. You've got to play with this remote server over the internet and all the different connections, all the potential things that can go wrong, and handle that as well. And that is no mean feat. And like you say, you have to have the scale for that, right? You're a software as a service. You're not just serving just one customer. It's multiple customers as well. And that
different scenarios of things that could go wrong. It will happen with your own organization in some way. Other organizations will hit all those different scenarios, so you're buying that experience as well.
But you're also buying other organizations' innovation. Other organizations' ideas, needs, the solutions that are being provisioned by the platform. I'm getting mixed up with words now. Provisioned, but a product is going to have all of those innovations in it, so you're benefiting from all of that rather than just your basic needs. So there's a lot of benefits to it. I mean, having led the design team for software as a service, I know how much it is a challenge to actually take those requirements from loads of different clients and actually pull them together into something that's configurable. That's not easy at all, but when it works, it really, really works well.
I wanted to pick up on something, Michael, you were talking about when Microsoft come in and may suddenly start offering something there. I mean, it feels like a bit of a roller coaster ride, with Microsoft being very supportive of partners and sort of saying, excellent. Yeah, we were, analytics is a great example where they provide some very base analytics, but they rely on third parties to go beyond that on there. But I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but what's been your experience in terms of when Microsoft screw people over versus where they're not? It seems generally at the moment they've been pretty good, with the probably poor example of Nintex workflow and the Power Platform. Otherwise, they've been quite nice to people more recently.
No, I mean, before Orchestria had Bonsai, obviously, so we were one of the first intranet in a box vendors. So we rode that wave pretty hard. I think we got in at a really good time. And I think we got out at a really good time, especially when, I sat down with Microsoft and they said, well, here's the roadmap for the next couple of years. And I'm just like, okay, well, this is going to be really challenging to any vendor within this space, unless you're really innovating right through. So Microsoft, I think, is generally pretty supportive, but you have to know, right? If they see a good idea and if they see all of a sudden 500 companies doing the same thing, they're going to realize that, hey, this is something that we should have within our product and start to concentrate around that. Sure, that happened with the Power Platform. That obviously happened more on the intranet publishing side. I wonder where their next kind of plan of attack is. But once Microsoft points, that battleship at a particular problem, then, like I said, it's interesting as a third-party vendor. You really have to, I think, innovate yourself into a position where these products are still going to be useful and valuable. But for us, we've had great experiences working with Microsoft, particularly with the Teams team. I think they've got a little bit of a different philosophy. They really see Teams as
as
a
a platform. Yeah.
for development. Exactly. But then again, 10 years ago, we also said the same thing about SharePoint. Remember that SharePoint 2007 was
SharePoint
a platform.
was going to do everything.
Exactly. Was going to be a platform.
It still is.
for
They're just calling
development
it Teams
also.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's still there. It's still underpinning pretty much everything. It's
Exactly.
still, yeah. It's funny how it's just SharePoint, just kind of like it's the old guy in it that just keeps going. It's just everyone else keeps getting the limelight, like Teams. I was a bit. I saw this quote and said, Teams is just a chat client for SharePoint. I love that line. Every time I look at Teams, I always think that, and I'm just thinking, yeah, it is.
Yeah, I think one of the things, as you rightly say, Michael, innovation is absolutely key to any third party, and as the purchaser of a third party solution, you're responsible for staying on top of what your needs are, and they don't stay the same. We always say that it's going to evolve. Microsoft 365 is constantly evolving. Your need for third party tools is also going to evolve as the platform changes. So it goes on both sides, that you can stick with some of the big names that you were alluding to, Kevin, in terms of what they may have been doing since 2010. They might still be doing very similar things. A lot of organizations haven't moved from there, but organizations that are moving and evolving with the technology and wanting to make the most out of the licensing that they've got in Microsoft 365 will find vendors that they match what that license is going to give. They are complementary to those licenses and making you get more out of it rather than actually replacing what you already get. So, and it's important for purchasers to think in that way as well.
Sorry, guys, just before we go on, I didn't realize I got a meeting at 1 here, so I got to jump off in about a minute, unfortunately. I know we went off a little bit over time here.
Yes. So one quick question. How do people find out what's out there?
So I think there's a number. So definitely through the Teams App Store, I think is a really good example of what exactly is out there. The other thing what I would also say is, look at what people are doing out there within the community and their past experience as well. Like there's a lot of third-party products out there where, maybe they haven't put as much money or as much effort into the marketing or some of those other pieces, and a lot of those products are great, but also a lot of those products aren't particularly great either. So I would definitely say, look at the people behind the company, see what they're doing, see the innovation. In the end, you need people who know what they're talking about. It's different than just creating some random startup, and not really knowing about the technology and just saying, I've got this great idea, I'm going to outsource it somewhere and then just push this. I think on top of M365, because it is more that business to business play, you really need, I think, people who have that experience and that passion for what they're doing. So the Teams App Store, see what community events are there, see what kind of companies are sponsoring those also. And I think you'll be in good stead.
And go and chat, though, when you're at conferences, especially in this virtual world, go and chat to some of those sponsors. They're going to be bored there in many cases. So go and talk, and they'll happily share and get a good feel for places there, I think. Okay. Awesome. I think given that, we'll probably try and wrap up fairly quickly. But thank you very much then, Michael, for sharing your interests and thoughts around what it is being on the other side, and for giving us a bit of your time again.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Otherwise, and we'll wrap up there. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks' time.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Thanks for listening to Grey Hat Beard Podcast. The song Drink Up My Mateys was brought to you by Black Bones under a non-commercial attribution license.